What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you so much for joining me today on this beautiful day. Welcome back to the channel. I hope you all are doing well today. And to all my new supporters joining us for the first time, welcome to the family. Welcome to the family. It's great to have you today. I hope everybody enjoys this video just as much as myself, because me as an American, I was unaware about this history event that took place in 1945. Everybody, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and turn all post notifications on so you do not miss another one of these reaction videos. Now, let's jump right into it, man. I'm trying to learn. I'm not wasting no more time going on one of my big rants today. Today, I'll be checking out Canadian paratroopers save Denmark, known as Operation Eclipse, from the year 1945. Let's go ahead and jump into this, man. I am not educated at all on this topic, so today will be my first time learning about this. Operation Eclipse was the name given to an Allied military operation in early May 1945. Operation Eclipse occurred very near to the end of World War II in Europe as a result of credible Swedish intelligence reports that stated that Stalin's Red Army would go beyond the territorial terms agreed at the Yalta Conference, or is it Ulta Conference? Is that Y silent? Somebody please clarify me. In February 1945. In fact, their target was Denmark, to give the Soviet Navy greater freedom of access to the Atlantic Ocean. The Soviet Union's Atlantic Fleet primarily used Murmansk in northern Russia, and this was icebound for many months in any given year. For the Soviet Union, occupation of Denmark would have brought huge military rewards as long as the Allies were unwilling to challenge them. Operation Eclipse was specifically the challenge to this threat. Operation Eclipse had three parts to it. The first was the occupation of Denmark to act as a clear sign to the Soviet authorities that the Allies were there to stay, as agreed at Yalta? Or Alta. Let me look this word up real quick so I can know how to pronounce it. Give me a few seconds. Okay, so the Y is not silent. Yalta. There we go. Yalta. Now we know how to pronounce the word, man. Just a quick little Google search could change things just like that, you see? Beautiful. The second part of Operation Eclipse was the taking of Kiel, a major base for the German Navy, and the securing of important scientific bases between the Danish border and Kiel. The third part was the taking of Wismar, which the Red Army had the right to take as part of the Yalta Agreement. Right. The operation of Denmark was relatively straightforward. In May 4th, the German High Command signed the terms of unconditional surrender at Lunenburg Heath. German troops in Denmark acted in accordance with the surrender, even if a few SS units continued to fight. See, it's always those people. It's always those few people, man. The power of Allies was shown on May 4th when a flotilla of British naval ships commanded by Captain Andy Palmer, DSC, two British cruisers, HMS Dido and HMS Birmingham, accompanied by 4 Z-class destroyers, entered Copenhagen Harbor after protecting a number of minesweepers that had cleared the waters around Denmark of mines. At the same time as these Royal Navy ships entered Copenhagen Harbor, a squadron of RAF Typhoons landed at a nearby air base that had been secured by paratroopers. 2 days later, another squadron of Typhoons landed. Any desire by the Germans to continue the fight would have been futile faced with such a force. On May 9th, Brigadier Lathbury landed at Copenhagen Airport to organize and oversee the surrender of German forces in Denmark.
In the final days of April 1945, British and Canadian forces prepared to cross the Elbe River in northern Germany. The military situation in Germany was extremely fluid. The 15th Scottish Division, with the British 1st Commando Brigade in support, would cross the Elbe, while the British 6th Airborne Division was to occupy the eastern bank of the river once the Scots had advanced on. On the 29th of April, the Scots crossed, and on the following day, the Paras followed. The same day, 30th of April, that Adolf Hitler killed himself in his Berlin bunker. Resistance ahead of the advancing British Commonwealth forces in northern Germany was patchy. The roads leading west were crammed with terrified refugees trying to escape the Soviets, who were advancing quickly towards the Baltic coast and the Western Allies' front lines. Mixed in with this human misery were German soldiers desperately trying to surrender to the British and avoid capture by the Red Army. The Elbe, according to agreements made between the United States, Britain and the Soviet Union at Yalta, would mark the furthest advance east by US and British forces. But there was a problem. Already, American and Soviet forces had met at Torgau, further south on the Elbe, on the 25th of April, cutting what remained of the Third Reich in half. The following day, the Soviets took Stettin on the Baltic coast. German resistance against the Soviets continued with undiminished fury, while units and whole armies sought to move west and surrender. The goal of every German soldier and civilian was to cross the Elbe into US or British occupied territory. British forces met fairly stiff German resistance at Hamburg, the largest city in northern Germany. But Winston Churchill had become concerned. It appeared that the Soviets would soon arrive at the Danish border. His fear was the Soviet occupation of Denmark, which was still in German hands. Churchill had assured the Danish government that British forces would liberate their country. Churchill also had a fear that a Soviet occupation of Denmark would give the Soviets post-war control of the Baltic Sea and its fleet easy access to the Atlantic, which Churchill was determined to prevent. But how to stop them? US and British forces were advancing well beyond the previously agreed formal line with the Soviets, evidently underestimating the desire of German forces to give up. The commander of the British 21st Army Group, Field Marshal Sir Bernard Montgomery, was consulted, and it was decided to send a lightly armed and mobile unit deep behind German lines to snatch the port of Wismar on the Baltic, directly in the path of the Soviets, and stop their advance for a few precious days while Operation Eclipse, the occupation of Denmark, and the capture of the German port of Kiel were made. If the Soviets couldn't be stopped at Wismar, it seemed certain that they would reach and enter southern Denmark, and once in would be difficult to eject. But there was a further problem. It had already been agreed at the Yalta Conference that Wismar would fall in the post-war Soviet zone of occupation. Although American and British forces would advance well into the Soviet zone, up to 200 miles in some places, these were only temporary advances, and the Soviet vanguard that arrived at Wismar would be unlikely to tolerate such an impudent block on its legally agreed advance. What would happen if the Soviets refused to stop? World War III could have broken out in the last days of World War II. Monty needed tough, battle-hardened and confident troops to effect the rapid capture of Wismar, and he had just the guys in the British 6th Airborne Division's 3rd and 5th Parachute Brigades. It was decided that the two brigades would advance to Wismar on separate routes, a race to ensure that at least one of them made it before the Soviets. The vanguard of the 3rd Brigade would be made up of the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion, and they left on the 2nd of May 1945, while 5th Brigade was still forming up. Formed in July 1942, the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion numbered just over 600 men and was trained in the United States and England. In July 1943, the battalion came under command of the 3rd Parachute Brigade, British 6th Airborne Division. It was dropped into Normandy in the early hours of the 6th of June 1944 and saw extensive action in the D-Day battles behind the beaches. Next up, the battalion fought in the Ardennes Offensive in Belgium in January 1945, taking part in the general British advance on the north of the German penetration in support of hard-pressed US forces. Its last combat drop was Operation Varsity, the crossing of the Rhine River, which involved 16,000 British, American and Canadian paratroopers jumping in broad daylight on the
Not 1,600, 16,000?
24th of March 1945. Advancing further into Germany, the Canadians came upon Bergen-Belsen concentration camp on the 15th of April. The final assignment for the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion would be reaching Wismar. B Company would ride forward on the tanks of the Royal Scots Greys, followed by A and C companies in Royal Army Service Corps vehicles. The battalion embarked at 0500 hours on the 2nd of May 1945, intending to reach the town of Wittenberg at noon. But they actually got there at 0930, as there was no opposition from German forces. Brigadier Hill, commanding the 3rd Parachute Brigade, was up forward with B Company, 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion, and he decided, in light of the lack of opposition and the necessity to reach Wismar as fast as possible, to just push on and hope for the best. The tanks lacked sufficient fuel to drive all the way to Wismar on one fueling.
I was going to say, and to take a tank that far, it's going to be a little rough, right? I mean, what if you were to run into the oppositions and they wanted to flank you guys? I think that's another good reason why it was best to split up. That way we know for sure one of us are going to make it, okay? While the other are focused on us. Yeah. But that tank is moving really slow. Really slow. You know, you could only so many people could take cover behind that tank as well. And only that tank can take so many bullets before it blows. Tanks? I mean...
And they made it to
Lutzow. Not trucks?
As B Company and the tanks approached where they planned to refuel from tankers following the Canadians, they came upon a wood at Lutzow where a German workshop detachment of 3,000 troops was encamped. Thousands of German civilians, including many women and children, some of them the wives and kids of the soldiers, were also with the German unit. A rumour had arrived that the Soviets were only 9 miles to the east, and the terrified soldiers and civilians wanted to surrender to the Canadians.
Really? I told you to stop playing with
Canadian troops ordered the Germans to dump their weapons on the side of the road and start walking west, without guards. The Canadians determined not to be slowed down in their race for Wismar. Once refueling of the tanks was completed, the column moved off again at top speed. The Royal Scots Greys tanks pounded along roads jam-packed with yet more German units and civilians, all fleeing west. Reaching Wismar, German resistance was minimal, just a few snipers and scattered shots. B Company drove straight through the heavily damaged town to occupy the railway line and road that led into town from the north. C Company covered the bridges and road leading in from the east, while A Company was held in reserve at the marketplace. Battalion headquarters being established in Frunt's Hotel. For the rest of the afternoon and night, thousands of German troops and civilians poured through the Canadian lines. As well as Germans heading west, several hundred Allied prisoners of war recently marched from camps to the east turned up in the Canadian lines as well, including a large contingent of British soldiers and Royal Air Force personnel, some originally captured at Dunkirk in 1940. Now it was just a waiting game, waiting for the Soviets to arrive. The Canadians didn't have long to wait. In the evening of the 2nd of May, an American Willys Jeep came along the road towards Wismar and was unexpectedly stopped by the Canadians. The Jeep didn't contain Americans, but a Soviet officer and his driver. The Soviet was driving far in advance of his own column, scouting the route into Wismar, and had no idea that Canadians were in the town already. Soon, more Soviets arrived at the Canadian perimeter. Brigadier Hill quickly dispatched Lieutenant Colonel Crookenden, a British officer, together with a handful of Russian-speaking Canadian paratroopers, to parley with the local Soviet commander. They drove east, passing a long column of Soviet T-34s of the 3rd Guards Tank Corps, headed ominously for Wismar, before turning and racing back to Wismar town. The T-34s were brought to a halt by a Canadian roadblock, complete with 17-pounder anti-tank guns.
Oh my goodness.
Major General Eric Bowles, commanding the 6th Airborne Division, came forward to Wismar to meet the senior Soviet officer. It was a tense meeting. The Soviet general stating that his orders were to capture Wismar and move on to Lübeck. Bowles told the Soviet that he had a complete airborne division and 5 regiments of artillery at his disposal, and would not hesitate to use them if the Soviets attempted to move forward any further. In a tense standoff, the Soviets blinked first and backed off, but the reality was an airborne division would have had difficulty stopping masses of Soviet tanks and rifle divisions if the Soviets had decided to force the issue. However, there was also a good deal of fraternizing between
So it was a front? It was just a good front, man. I'm wondering how things would have went if they would have pushed
the
up a little bit more.
Canadians and Soviets along the perimeter, but the distrust remained and grew stronger as time passed. At night, Soviets got into Wismar, and there were some cases of rape and looting, and Canadian paratroopers...
What? You make me sick. I didn't know these... Of course, it's war. I did know these type of things go on in war. I wouldn't think, that's on soldiers' minds. Was it the soldiers doing it? Or was it the citizens, because they think it's war and stuff is getting blown up and stuff now. Because we don't got a roof, you feel that it's okay to go ahead and start doing this to females. I heard about a situation like that when a whole bunch of prisoners got loose. And they was doing that to all the women in the town, man. Make me sick.
The troopers opened fire on them more than once and probably killed some, according to veterans' accounts. In turn, the Soviets forbade entry to their territory, established their own roadblocks, and reinforced their tanks. Meanwhile, the time the Canadian paratroopers had bought for the British was being fully exploited. On the same day that Wismar was captured, 2nd of May 1945, Lübeck fell to British forces and Hamburg surrendered. On the 4th of May, Field Marshal Montgomery accepted the surrender of all German forces in the Netherlands, northwestern Germany and Denmark at a ceremony on Lüneburg Heath near Hamburg. Allied forces began arriving in Denmark on the afternoon of the 5th of May. However, the island of Bornholm was under Soviet bombardment, preparatory to an amphibious assault. But this was as far as the Soviets managed to get into Denmark, Bornholm being occupied until the 5th of May 1946. The blocking of the land route via Wismar by Canadian paratroopers undoubtedly saved northwestern Germany and Denmark from being overrun and occupied by Stalin's forces, an event that would have altered forever the political and economic landscape of post-war Europe and extended communist influence hundreds of miles to the west. The German High Command signed the complete capitulation in Berlin on the 8th of May 1945, bringing World War II in Europe to an end.
Okay.
But the originally agreed areas of occupation had to be enforced, and it meant that US and British forces would have to pull back from certain areas of Germany destined to form part of the Soviet zone, and this included Canadian-occupied Wismar. On the 8th of May, Monty himself came to Wismar to meet Soviet Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky, commanding the 2nd Belarusian Front. On the 17th of May, the Canadian and British soldiers left Wismar to be driven to Lüneburg and then flown to England. Wismar would spend the next 40 years behind the Iron Curtain, part of communist East Germany. The 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion had been the first Canadian unit to land in Normandy on D-Day, one of the first to cross the Rhine, and the first British Commonwealth unit to shake hands with the Soviets. They were, in June 1945, the first Canadian unit to be repatriated home. During World War II, the battalion lost 9 officers and 112 other ranks killed and 286 wounded. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share. You can also visit my new...
And it's pretty crazy knowing that this possibly could have sparked World War III as well. Possibly. You guys let me know how you felt about this video down below in the comments section. Like I said, me, myself, as an American, this is my first time getting educated on Operation Eclipse from 1945. And I really needed to watch this, man. I never knew Britain and Canada came together to fight against Germany. You see what I'm saying? These are things that we need to be taught in school as well. But I understand because, oh, America's not in it, this and that, we don't need to learn about it. Okay, it is our allies, though. You know, I think it'll be kind of cool to learn about what our allies are doing as well throughout the times of war, so that we can stop thinking that America did everything. Who agrees with me right there, man. Everybody, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and turn all post notifications on if you enjoyed this educational video just as much as myself. And feel free to share this video and this channel to your friends and family members. Whoever you feel may be interested in joining the family along on a daily basis to watch some of these educational, intriguing videos. You guys feel free to let me know any information I may have missed from this video down below in the comment section, or any information that you feel was not included throughout this educational video that you would like for me to know. I'm open to read all comments, and you guys know how much I look forward to reading comments and just connecting with the community, man. Come on now, we like family. Once again, I'll see you all in the next reaction video. Stay safe.